The cottage wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, a lifeline. After the emotional gauntlet of the Blue Shield Foundation's annual fundraising gala, a week of handshakes, speeches, and bearing witness to the quiet grief and resilient courage of first responder families, I was utterly spent. My work, founding and running a foundation that supports the families of fallen and injured police officers and firefighters, is the most meaningful thing I've ever done. It is also a weight that settles deep in the bones. My assistant, Maria, had been firm. "Daniel," she'd said, pushing a set of old brass keys across my desk. "The board has mandated a 2-week, off-the-grid vacation for you. No calls, no emails. Go to your family's cottage. Disappear. That's an order." So I disappeared. I drove north, away from the city's relentless hum, to Gilded Shores, a community my parents had bought into decades ago, when it was just a sleepy collection of fishing cottages. My family's place was one of the originals, a humble, cedar-shingled cottage passed down to me, its value measured not in square footage, but in memories. It was where my father, a cop for 30 years, had taught me how to cast a line and how to find solace in the quiet lap of lake water against a wooden dock. It was my designated place to exhale. The Gilded Shores I returned to, however, was a far cry from the sleepy haven of my memories. The old cottages were mostly gone, replaced by sprawling, ostentatious mansions that competed for shoreline dominance, their manicured lawns rolling down to the water like unnaturally green carpets. My modest cottage, nestled on a prime point of land, was now an anachronism, a rustic relic in a sea of beige stucco and Corinthian columns. I felt the shift on my very first day. As I was unloading my car, I couldn't help but notice the frantic activity at the massive house next door. An army of caterers, florists, and event planners swarmed around a colossal white tent being erected on the lawn. It was clearly the prelude to a significant social event. A woman emerged from the house, directing the workers with the imperious air of a field marshal. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed in white linen, her face a mask of taut, expensive maintenance. She spotted me and my beat-up station wagon, and her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a look of profound annoyance. She marched across her lawn to the low stone wall that separated our properties. "Hello," I said, offering a neighborly wave. "I'm Daniel Maxwell." "I know who you are," she said, her voice cool and clipped. She did not introduce herself. "Your family's cottage has been an eyesore for years, but we've tolerated it. However," she gestured toward the tent, "I am hosting a very important gala here this weekend for the hospital fundraising committee. We will have some of the most influential people in the state as our guests." Her eyes swept over my cottage, my car, and finally me, with undisguised contempt. "It is incredibly unfortunate that my guests will have to be subjected to the view of this." She waved a dismissive hand at my home. "I trust you will be discreet and keep your property tidy. First impressions are everything." She didn't wait for a response, simply turned and strode back to her command post, leaving me standing in my driveway, a bag of groceries in my hand. I had been in the community for less than an hour, and I had already been designated as a blemish, an inconvenient piece of reality that threatened to spoil my neighbor's carefully curated illusion of perfection, my mandated 2 weeks of peace. I realized with a familiar, sinking feeling, we're going to be anything but. The first volley in my neighbor's campaign to erase my inconvenient existence came, as it so often does, in the form of an official-looking letter from the Homeowners Association. The woman, who I now knew from the signature, was Cynthia Davenport, HOA President, had not wasted any time. The letter, delivered the very next day, was a masterclass in petty tyranny. It began by citing Bylaw 117C regarding outdoor furnishings. My two beloved weathered Adirondack chairs, which had sat on the cottage's small lawn for as long as I could remember, were deemed non-conforming. The bylaw, passed the previous winter, apparently required all outdoor seating to be made of wrought iron, cast aluminum, or approved all-weather wicker in a neutral color palette. My rustic, wooden chairs were an aesthetic offense. The fine was $50. The second violation was even more galling. For as long as the cottage had stood, a small, simple flagpole had been attached to the porch railing, from which my father had always flown an American flag. According to Cynthia, this was now a violation of Bylaw 84F, which prohibited any unapproved vertical structures, including but not limited to poles, masts, or antennae. If I wanted to display a flag, I had to purchase an HOA-approved angled wall-mounted bracket. The fine for my patriotic transgression was another $50. The letter concluded with a warning about the inconsistent coloration and size of the aggregate material in my simple gravel driveway, suggesting I consult the HOA's list of approved landscape contractors to have it remediated with uniform gray stone. I read the letter twice, a feeling of weary disbelief washing over me. I had spent the last week navigating the complex emotional and logistical needs of dozens of grieving families. I had sat with widows, played with children who would now grow up without a parent, and listened to harrowing stories of bravery and loss. To pivot from that world of profound, real-world consequence to a manufactured crisis over the color of my lawn chairs felt like a descent into absurdity. My first instinct was to fight, to write a scathing letter back detailing the sheer ridiculousness of her claims. But my mission here was to decompress, not to engage in a war of attrition. For the sake of quiet, I chose the path of compliance. That afternoon, I went into town and bought a small, angled bracket for the flag. I took the flagpole down, the sense of resentful defeat a bitter taste in my mouth. I moved the Adirondack chairs to the back of the cottage, out of sight from the street. That evening, I had my weekly check-in call with Maria, my foundation's incredible second-in-command. I couldn't help but vent about the HOA situation. "You won't believe this, Maria," I said, pacing the small living room. "I'm being fined because my chairs are made of wood." She listened patiently, as she always did. "Just document it. Daniel," she said, her voice calm and professional. "You know the drill. Keep a file. It's just another form of bureaucracy." Then, she shifted seamlessly back to business. "Speaking of which, did the check for the K-9 unit's new trauma kits get sent out? And I need you to approve the grant for the Henderson County Sheriff's Department's new wellness program. Their chief called, said it's a real game changer for his deputies' mental health." "Yes, approve it," I said without hesitation. "And please, follow up with the widow of Sergeant Evans. I know the funeral was last week. See if she needs anything at all, grief counseling, financial planning, a handyman. Whatever she needs, we provide it. That's our promise." We finished the call, and I sat in the quiet cottage, the irony of my situation settling over me. In my professional life, my entire purpose was to support and honor the law enforcement community. My foundation was a shield for them and their families. Yet here, in my personal sanctuary, I was being treated like a low-grade nuisance, a problem to be managed and, if possible, eliminated by a woman whose only authority came from a three-ring binder of petty rules. A few days after the party, a crew of landscapers descended upon Cynthia's property, digging up her prize-winning rose bushes and installing an obscenely large, bubbling fountain. The noise of saws and heavy equipment shattered the lakeside peace for 3 straight days. At the end of it all, she had a new water feature, and a 10-foot section of the historic stone wall that marked our property line had been knocked down, the stones carelessly tossed onto my lawn. When I politely pointed it out to her, she waved a dismissive hand. My contractors must have had an accident. Send me a bill. There was no apology, just the arrogant assumption that any damage could be erased with money. This was not the act of a neighbor. It was the act of a feudal lord. The second phase of Cynthia's campaign began with a direct assault on the cottage's identity. By the gravel driveway stood a beautiful, hand-carved wooden sign that my father had commissioned from a local artist years ago. It simply read, "The Maxwell Cottage." It was a landmark, a piece of the property's soul. A week after my arrival, a new violation notice appeared, this one delivered by hand and tucked under my door. It was a formal warning that my sign violated bylaw 212A concerning residential identification markers. The bylaw stipulated that all such markers must be no more than 24 inches wide. My sign, a generous 30 inches, was a flagrant breach of this critical standard. I was given 7 days to remove it. I stared at the letter, then at the sign. A beautiful piece of craftsmanship that had welcomed my family home for 2 decades. The thought of taking it down felt like another surrender, another piece of my history being chipped away. I decided to ignore the notice. It was a line in the sand. My sign was staying. 2 nights later, I was woken by the sound of a car speeding away down the quiet lane. A gut feeling sent me outside in my pajamas with a flashlight. My heart sank. The beautiful sign had been vandalized. Someone had taken a can of lurid fluorescent pink spray paint and scrawled the words, "Get out," across the hand-carved letters. The paint was still tacky, dripping down the weathered wood in ugly, viscous tears. A cold, quiet rage built inside me. This was no longer about petty rules. This was a direct, personal, and hateful attack. It was designed to intimidate, to make me feel unwelcome and unsafe in my own home. I knew, with absolute certainty, who was behind it. It was deniable, of course. She would blame it on teenagers or random vandals. But the message was clearly hers. I spent the next morning trying to scrub the paint off, but it had already soaked into the porous wood, leaving a hideous, permanent stain. As I was working, a rusty old pickup truck slowed and pulled into my driveway. An older man with a weathered face and a state trooper decal on his back window got out. "Morning," he said, his eyes taking in the vandalized sign. "That's a real shame. A real damn shame. Tell me about it," I sighed, putting down my scrub brush in defeat. The man looked at me, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "Hey, you're Mr. Maxwell, aren't you, from the Blue Shield Foundation?" I was taken aback. "Yes, I am. I thought I recognized you," he said, a warm smile spreading across his face as he extended a calloused hand. "Name's Bill, retired state trooper. I met you at the memorial breakfast in the Capitol last year. My son's on the force now. Your foundation, what you do for our folks is just incredible. Truly." The unexpected kindness, the sudden connection to my other life, was jarring. "Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that." He looked again at the sign, his expression hardening. "This is ugly business. You just get here." "A couple of weeks ago," I said. "And you've already made an enemy of the queen bee next door." "I take it," he said, nodding toward Cynthia's mansion. "She's a piece of work, that one. Thinks she owns the whole lake." Bill walked over to the sign and ran a hand over the carved letters. "Look, I do a bit of woodworking in my retirement. I could take this back to my shop. Sand it down. Restain it for you. Probably get most of this garbage off. No charge. Consider it a small thank you for everything you do for my brothers and sisters in blue. I was overwhelmed, both by his generosity and by the surreal nature of the moment. Here was a complete stranger, a retired cop, offering to help me clean up the mess left by my neighbor's campaign of harassment, all because of the work I did in a life I was trying to escape. I couldn't ask you to do that, Bill, I said. You're not asking. I'm offering, he insisted. We look after our own. And you, sir, are one of our own. He helped me unbolt the sign from its posts, and together we loaded it into the back of his truck. As he drove away, I was left with a complex swirl of emotions. I was furious at Cynthia, but I was also filled with a deep, profound sense of gratitude. Her attempt to deface my home, to isolate and intimidate me, had inadvertently revealed the very opposite, that I was part of a community, a vast and loyal brotherhood, that she could not begin to comprehend. Her attack had failed, and in doing so, had only strengthened my resolve. Having failed to intimidate me with property damage, Cynthia shifted her tactics to social isolation and public slander. She wielded the Gilded Shores online resident portal like a cudgel, using its veneer of community spirit to wage a sophisticated and vicious campaign against me. It began subtly. A few days before her massive lakeside gala, she posted a community announcement on the portal's main page. Dearest neighbors, it began, dripping with false sincerity. As many of you know, my husband and I are hosting our annual charity gala this weekend. We are so looking forward to welcoming our many distinguished guests and showcasing the unparalleled beauty of Gilded Shores. To that end, we would like to remind everyone of the importance of maintaining the aesthetic integrity of our shared shoreline. Let's all do our part to present our very best face to the community. The post was a dog whistle, a clear and pointed message aimed directly at my eyesore of a cottage. The comments from her sycophants were immediate and sickeningly sweet. Thank you for all you do. Cynthia, you're the heart of this community. Can't wait for the party. I'm sure everything will be perfect. When the gala was over, her posts took on a sharper, more personal edge. She began to fabricate rumors, couching them in the language of concern. A number of residents have expressed concern to me about the occupant of the old Maxwell cottage, she wrote one evening. He seems to have no visible means of support, and the property is falling into disrepair. We all hope he is not in some kind of financial distress, but the board has a fiduciary duty to protect property values from the effects of neglect. The post was a calculated character assassination in a community obsessed with wealth and status. She was painting me as a financial deadbeat, a poor relation who couldn't afford the upkeep. The reality that I ran a successful, nationally recognized charitable foundation was conveniently ignored. In her narrative, I was simply unemployed. The rumors she planted on the forum began to take root in the real world. Neighbors who had once been friendly became distant and cold. Conversations would halt when I walked past. I was no longer just the guy in the old cottage. I was the problem property, the financial risk, the person who was not their kind of people. The isolation was palpable. My quiet retreat was beginning to feel like a form of social quarantine. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, trying to lose myself in a book. On the small table beside me was a framed photograph from my office. It was a picture of me at an award ceremony for the Blue Shield Foundation a few years ago. In the photo, I'm shaking hands with the governor. To my right stands the state police commissioner, and to my left, the chief of the state's largest city police department. We are all smiling. It was a proud moment, a recognition of the millions of dollars my foundation had raised to support their officers and their families. I looked from the photo, a picture of me being honored by the state's most powerful figures in law enforcement, to the perfectly manicured lawn of my neighbor, a woman who was successfully painting me as a vagrant and a deadbeat in our tiny community. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. In one world, I was a respected partner, a trusted ally to the powerful. In this world, I was a nuisance, a blight on the pristine landscape of a petty tyrant's ego. The campaign of slander reached its peak when Cynthia posted a security alert on the resident portal. "Dear residents," she wrote, her tone one of high alarm, "it has come to my attention that the occupant of the Maxwell cottage has been seen taking photographs of neighboring properties. Given that we know very little about this individual, this is obviously concerning behavior. Please be vigilant and report any suspicious activity to the board or to the sheriff's department immediately." The lie was so audacious, so cynically brilliant, it almost took my breath away. I had been taking pictures, but they were of the vandalized sign, the damaged stone wall, and the overflowing dumpsters from her party, all evidence for the file I was meticulously compiling. She had seen me documenting her own transgressions and had twisted it into an accusation of me being some kind of stalker or burglar, casing the neighborhood. I was now not just a financial risk, I was a potential security threat. The last vestiges of neighborly neutrality vanished. The looks I received were no longer just cold. They were suspicious, fearful. My quiet walks along the lane were met with curtains being drawn and doors being locked. Cynthia's attempt to isolate me was complete. She had successfully cut me off from the community, defined me as an undesirable outsider, and created a narrative that would justify any further action she took against me. She had surrounded my small cottage with a wall of fear and suspicion. It was a classic siege tactic, and I knew it was merely the prelude to a more direct and dangerous assault. Having successfully poisoned the well of public opinion, Cynthia moved on to the next phase of her operation, using the full weight of local and state authorities to harass me directly. She was no longer content with slander. She now sought official validation for her campaign, attempting to find any government agency that would declare my existence a violation. The first official car to pull down my driveway belonged to the county fire marshal. A stern-looking man in a crisp uniform knocked on my door, a clipboard in his hand. He introduced himself as Marshal Johnson. "Sir," he said, his tone all business, "we've received a formal complaint regarding an unlicensed and hazardous burn pit on your property. The complainant alleges you are creating a significant fire risk to the community." I led him around to the small, stone-lined fire pit my father had built decades ago. It was at least 50 feet from the cottage, and even further from the tree line, surrounded by a wide circle of clear gravel. It was a textbook example of a safe, well-maintained fire pit. "This is it," I said. "It's been here for 30 years. Marshal Johnson walked around it, kicked at one of the stones, and then looked at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You're Daniel Maxwell, right from the Blue Shield Foundation." "I am," I said, surprised. His entire demeanor softened. "I thought that was you. I'm a volunteer firefighter in my spare time. My local, Station 7. We received a grant from you guys last year. Bought us a new set of thermal imaging cameras after our old ones failed. Saved my life on a house fire call back in March." He shook his head, his expression turning to one of disgust. "I cannot believe she's wasting my time with this nonsense." He scribbled on his clipboard with a flourish. "For the record, your fire pit is 100% compliant with all county and state fire codes. I'm marking this complaint as unfounded and vexatious." He handed me a copy of the report. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Maxwell. I'm sorry you have to deal with this." The second official visit, a week later, was from the State Environmental Protection Agency. This time, the complaint was that I was using a highly polluting, unregistered two-stroke outboard motor on my small fishing boat, allegedly leaving a sheen of oil on the lake. A young, earnest EPA agent arrived and asked to inspect my boat. I led him down to the dock, where my 14-foot aluminum boat was tied up. Attached to the transom was not a gas-guzzling two-stroke, but a small, silent, state-of-the-art electric trolling motor. I handed him the boat's registration and the motor's manual. "It's an electric motor," I said. "It doesn't use any gas or oil. It's about as zero emission as you can get." The agent inspected the motor, checked the registration, and sighed. "That's what I figured," he said. "The complainant sent us a blurry photo of a different boat and claimed it was yours. We have to follow up on every complaint. But this one smelled fishy from the start." He, too, filed a report clearing me of any wrongdoing. Each visit was a victory for me, a formal debunking of Cynthia's lies. But they were also a disruption, an invasion of my privacy, and a constant, draining stress. She was forcing me to repeatedly prove my innocence against a never-ending barrage of baseless accusations. The final straw came in the form of a visit from animal control. The complaint, the officer told me, her voice dripping with weary sarcasm, was that my cottage was infested with squirrels, and that I was maintaining a squirrel-attracting nuisance on my property. The nuisance in question was a single, small bird feeder I had hung from a tree branch. The officer, a woman named Carol, looked from the bird feeder to me and then burst out laughing. "A squirrel infestation, ma'am. This is the woods. There are squirrels. This is the most ridiculous complaint I've had all year." She paused. Then her eyes widened slightly as she looked at my face more closely. "Wait a minute. You're Daniel Maxwell, aren't you?" "I am," I said, beginning to feel like a broken record. "I knew it," she said, her smile broadening. "I saw you speak at the state police convention last spring. My late husband was a trooper. Your foundation's survivor benefit program. It was a godsend for me and my kids after he was killed." Her eyes misted over for a moment. "I'm so sorry. Mr. Maxwell, this woman, this Cynthia Davenport, she is a known quantity to us. She calls about raccoons, about deer, about everything. But to use us to harass you, that's a new low." She shook her head in disgust. "You just let me know if there's anything you need. Anything at all." After she left, I sat on my porch. The 3 official reports from the fire marshal, the EPA, and animal control spread out on the table in front of me. Cynthia's strategy was backfiring in a way she couldn't possibly anticipate. She thought she was using the system to attack me. But the system was populated by people firefighters, police officers, public servants who were the very heart of my life's work. They were my people. And by attacking me, she was inadvertently revealing to them that one of their most dedicated allies was under siege. Her attempts to use the authorities as a weapon were only succeeding in making them my allies. The string of failures to get me cited by any official authority seemed to have pushed Cynthia into a state of frantic desperation. Her grand gala had come and gone, and my eyesore of a cottage was still there, a monument to her impotence. The day before, she had planned another, smaller, but equally exclusive lakeside luncheon. She decided the time for indirect attacks was over. I was sitting on my dock, enjoying the late morning sun, a book open on my lap, but my eyes on the shimmering water. I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path and looked up to see her storming towards me. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She was no longer playing the part of the concerned HOA president. This was a raw, undisguised display of rage. She stopped at the edge of the dock, her expensive sandals just inches from the weathered wood. "I want you to leave," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I closed my book. "I'm sorry." "You heard me," she snapped, her voice tight and controlled. "I am hosting a luncheon tomorrow for the museum board. It is a very important event. My guests will be seated on the veranda, with a full view of the lake." She gestured vaguely at my cottage, at me. "I cannot have them looking at this. And I certainly cannot have you sitting out here, in your chair, staring at us. It's unseemly." I stared at her, trying to process the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of her demand. She was ordering me to vacate my own home for the convenience of her party guests. "Cynthia," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "this is my property. I am not going to leave." Her face, which I had thought could not get any tighter, seemed to shrink in on itself. A muscle in her jaw pulsed. "You just don't get it, do you?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "You think you've won, because your little friends in the county won't write you a ticket. That was just the beginning. You have no idea the kind of power I have in this community. My husband is one of the top litigators in the state. You want to fight, we will bury you." She took a menacing step forward, her shadow falling over me. "I will have his firm's junior associates go through your life with a microscope. They will find every unpaid parking ticket, every late tax payment, every single mistake you have ever made. We will tie you up in court for years over every single bylaw, every comma, every period. We will file liens against this property. We will drain your bank accounts. I will make it my personal mission to ruin you so completely that you will be begging me to buy this hovel from you for a fraction of its worth." It was a declaration of total war. The threat was no longer about fines or forced compliance. It was a direct, unambiguous promise to destroy me financially and legally, to use her wealth and influence to crush me into dust. It was the ugliest, most naked display of bullying I had ever witnessed. "You will not be here for my luncheon tomorrow," she said, her voice rising again. "I will not have my reputation, my social standing, my entire life's work in this community ruined by your selfish, stubborn presence." I stood up slowly, my 5'11" frame suddenly feeling much larger than her 5'4". I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just looked at her, my expression calm, my eyes holding hers. "This is my home, Cynthia," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "My father's home. I am not going anywhere." For a moment, she seemed taken aback by my lack of fear, by my refusal to be intimidated. Then her face twisted into a final, ugly sneer. "We'll see about that," she spat, and turned and stormed back towards her mansion. I watched her go, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a sudden, clarifying sense of resolve. For weeks, I had been on the defensive, reacting to her attacks, trying to appease an unappeasable tyrant, but her threat, so raw and so vicious, had changed everything. This was no longer about a quiet summer retreat. It was about defending my home, my father's legacy, and my own right to exist peacefully. She had declared war, and I finally realized, with a heavy heart, that it was a war she was not going to be allowed to win. The day of the luncheon arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched afternoon. The air was filled with the scent of blooming hydrangeas and the sound of classical music drifting from Cynthia's veranda. A parade of luxury cars began to arrive, disgorging guests in expensive summer attire. I watched them from my cottage, a silent observer to a world I did not belong to and had no desire to join. At precisely 1 o'clock, the time the luncheon was set to begin, I took one of my non-conforming wooden Adirondack chairs, a tall glass of iced tea, and a thick history book, and walked down to the edge of my lawn. I placed the chair in a spot that was undeniably on my property, but in full, clear view of Cynthia's party. I was not being loud. I was not being disruptive. I was not staring or taking pictures. I was simply existing, quietly and peacefully, in my own space. It took less than 5 minutes for her to notice. I saw her appear on the veranda, her body going rigid. She excused herself from a group of guests and disappeared into her house. A moment later, she came storming across her perfect lawn, her progress slightly hampered by her high-heeled sandals sinking into the soft turf. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She didn't stop at the property line. She marched right up to my chair, her shadow falling across the pages of my book. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice a shrill instrument of fury that caused several of her guests to turn and stare. "I told you to leave. This is a private event. You are doing this on purpose to ruin everything. I want you gone. Now!" I slowly lowered my book. "Cynthia," I said, my voice the very picture of calm. "I am on my own property. Reading a book? I'm not doing anything wrong." "I don't care," she screamed, her composure completely gone. "You are a trespasser. You are harassing my guests. I am calling the police." She whipped out her phone and dialed 911, her voice a frantic, hysterical performance for her audience on the veranda. "Yes, police. I need an officer immediately. At 12 Gilded Shore Lane. There is a strange man on my property. He's a trespasser. He's peeping at my guests, and he's refusing to leave. He's very threatening. Please, hurry." She hung up, a look of wild, triumphant fury in her eyes. This was it. The final move. She had manufactured a crime, summoned the law, and was about to have me publicly humiliated and dragged away in front of her powerful friends. I remained in my chair. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, and I waited. A single sheriff's deputy car arrived in less than 10 minutes, its lights flashing. A young, professional-looking officer stepped out. His name tag read Miller. Cynthia rushed to him, a torrent of frantic accusations pouring from her lips. "Thank God you're here." "Officer," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This man is trespassing. He's been harassing my guests, and he refuses to leave. I want him removed immediately. I want to press charges." Deputy Miller listened patiently, then walked toward me. He had a standard, neutral cop face on. "Sir," he began, "I have a complaint that you're trespassing on." He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes, which had been glancing around the scene, now focused on my face. His professional neutrality dissolved, replaced by a look of stunned, absolute disbelief, which then morphed into something else entirely, a look of profound, almost reverential respect. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, his voice barely a whisper, filled with awe. "Daniel Maxwell, from the Blue Shield Foundation." I stood up from my chair. "That's me," I said quietly. The deputy's entire posture changed. He straightened up, his shoulders squaring. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, I'm Deputy Miller. My partner, Sergeant Henderson. He was killed in that warehouse collapse 3 years ago. His family, his wife and kids, your foundation. He trailed off, swallowing hard, unable to finish the sentence. I stepped forward and put a hand on his shoulder. His uniform was crisp under my palm. I remember Sergeant Henderson. Son, I said softly, the memory of the young man's photograph clear in my mind. He was a hero, a good man. How is his family doing? They're okay, sir, Miller said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. They're okay because of you. The foundation paid off their mortgage. You made sure his kids will have a college fund. You gave them a future. He took a deep, steadying breath, the emotion on his face solidifying into a cold, hard anger. He turned and looked at the utterly bewildered Cynthia. His voice, when he spoke to her, was dangerously quiet. Ma'am, he said, walking slowly towards her. Is it true that you called 911 to falsely report a trespasser in an attempt to have Mr. Maxwell, a man who was sitting peacefully on his own property, removed? Cynthia was speechless. She was a supercomputer that had just been fed a line of code it could not possibly compute. The entire power dynamic of her universe had just been inverted. But he was my party. The View, she stammered. Ma'am, Deputy Miller said, his voice like chips of ice. He was now standing on her side of the property line, but his authority filled the entire space. You are currently standing on Mr. Maxwell's property. You are the one who is trespassing. You have just admitted, in front of me, to filing a false police report, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor in this state. You have done this in an attempt to harass a man who has done more for my department and for law enforcement families across the state than anyone I have ever met. He pointed a single, steady finger back toward her mansion. I am giving you 10 seconds to return to your own property. Then I am going to take Mr. Maxwell's full statement, and then, ma'am, I am going to go back to my car, and I am going to file a criminal complaint against you. Your party is over. The humiliation was total and absolute. In front of her, powerful, influential guests, who had witnessed the entire exchange, Cynthia Davenport had been unmasked, dressed down, and dismissed by the very authority she had tried to weaponize, her face a mask of pale, horrified shock. She turned without a word and retreated, a queen being escorted from her own failed coup. Deputy Miller stayed for nearly an hour. He took my full, detailed statement, listening with a look of growing anger as I recounted the months-long campaign of fines, vandalism, slander, and harassment. I provided him with the file Maria had helped me keep, a thick folder of letters, photographs, and official reports. He handled it like it was evidence in a major case. The sheriff is going to want to see this personally, sir, he said, his voice filled with grim determination. We don't take kindly to people who target our friends. The repercussions for Cynthia were swift and severe. As Deputy Miller had promised, he filed a criminal complaint for filing a false police report, but it didn't stop there. The sheriff, a man whose department had received multiple life-saving grants from the Blue Shield Foundation over the years, personally called me to apologize for his department's time being wasted and for what I had endured. He launched a formal investigation into Cynthia's harassment. Faced with criminal charges and the undisguised enmity of local law enforcement, Cynthia's carefully constructed world collapsed. The HOA board, terrified of being named in a lawsuit and facing immense pressure from the community, demanded her immediate resignation. Her social standing evaporated overnight. The story of her public humiliation at the party spread like wildfire through the very circles she so desperately wanted to impress. Her husband, the powerful litigator, apparently had no stomach for a public fight that involved his wife harassing a beloved figure in the law enforcement community. Within 6 months, a for sale sign was planted on their immaculate lawn. A new HOA board was elected, led by my neighbor Bill, the retired state trooper. The petty vindictive bylaws were overhauled. A sense of genuine community, one based on mutual respect rather than forced conformity, began to return to Gilded Shores. One quiet evening, a few weeks later, I was sitting on my dock, watching the last light fade from the sky. A familiar truck pulled into my driveway, and Deputy Miller, now off duty and in jeans and a t-shirt, walked down to the dock with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might be thirsty, sir," he said, handing me a bottle. "Daniel," I corrected him, smiling. "And thank you, son." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the gentle rhythm of the lake. "You know," he said finally, "for a long time after my partner died, I was angry. At the world. At the job. But seeing what you do, seeing that there are people like you out there who have our backs, it makes a difference." I looked out at the darkening water. I had come to the cottage seeking an escape from the weight of my work. But in the end, it was the work that had saved me. The community I had built, the promises I had kept, the lives I had touched. They had come back to me in an unexpected but deeply satisfying way. My father's cottage was safe, and I, at last, was at peace.